And we are back here once again with another episode of the MSK show, and this is going to be episode 67. And in this episode of the MSK show, I will be having a conversation with indie creator Steve. What's your last name?
Guglich.
Guglich. Awesome. So we got there. See, I didn't butcher it. He just caught my assist. That's what a great person does on the basketball team. So,
all right.
And this is going to be his first time on the show. We've been trying to set this up for, good Lord, about a month or two? Give or take?
About a month. Yeah. Just the week time got away from both of us.
Yeah. The week that I was ready, you were working, I think like 6 days, you said. The week that I was, and then it came around, I had to work like 2 days, like 6 days. And then we could have did it last Thursday, but I didn't know if I was going to be staying at work longer. So if I usually am antsy about like what time I get off work generally, because I don't know, I don't want to have that person like wait and I'm just heading home and they're just like thinking, oh, we're not gonna have a show. So we finally got to the point here. As people know, if you are an indie creator, as far as like an author or a comic book writer or someone's doing that, I'm the guy. I'm that guy that will listen to your story, and I vaguely might remember it. I'm storing stuff up in my brain. So if anyone out there,
67th episode. I mean, my goodness, that's.
Oh no, I've did many other podcasts in the past. I had to finally reboot to this one, just like Marvel comics. You know, when the ratings on the other ones start failing, you got to go back to a number one. That's where it's
gotcha. Okay, makes sense. All right.
So we'll start here just in case you come back on for a second and third appearance later on down the road. That way this is already out. How was your life growing up?
My life growing up? Well, I was born in Yonkers, New York, and I lived most of my life in Queens and Manhattan, New York.
You were born in New York?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. New York. Oh, yeah.
You lived in Manhattan, the most expensive city in the world.
That's right. Yeah, but it wasn't as glamorous as it sounds. My dad was a custodian for an apartment complex, so we had and growing up when I was in elementary and middle school, we were living in Rockaway, Queens, which was which was a pretty tough neighborhood. I grew up. We were in poverty, living paycheck to paycheck most of the time. I never expected to go to college or anything like that. I just expected I'd follow in my dad's footsteps and do, who knows, it was interesting because my dad was always, he was always upbeat. I mean, even though we lived the way we did, he was always upbeat, always, and that's where I get my imagination from, because his escape was books. His escape was planning games and making up games. I mean, if my dad had lived another life, he would have been the president of Hasbro or something like that. He had so many different games that he created. And then when we got into role-playing games, when I had some friends in the neighborhood show me Dungeons and Dragons, and I came home and I talked to him about that, he really got into that, and we started playing all these different role-playing games as I was growing up, and we just had a blast. I mean, so that was my life growing up, in Rockaway, Queens, then Manhattan. Like I said, I was born in Yonkers first, but yeah.
So after that, you went to the public high school and stuff like that, public school system. Did you end up going to college?
Yeah. So okay. I went through the public school system. I got in a lot of trouble in elementary and middle school. Before I hit 6th grade, I was suspended 32 times.
What the hell?
Also, I know. It was like I said, it was a tough neighborhood. But then when we moved to Manhattan, my dad took a job as a custodian for a Hebrew temple there, and which was really interesting. So we had
New York has a lot of Jewish people.
Yes. Yeah. And it was really interesting because we lived we had an apartment within the temple itself. So upstairs was the sanctuary, the bottom was the fellowship hall, and our apartment was sandwiched right there in the middle. So it was interesting growing up, in high school, going to high school there. And when I hit high school, My dad had always made me promise, no matter what, that I would finish high school. Didn't think I was going to go to college, but when I
Mhm.
was in high school, I met Joanne Houtman, and she was the wind beneath my wings. She was the one. She was the faculty advisor for the school newspaper. I just wanted to kind of help out with the school newspaper, and thought I would do some drawings and whatnot for a comic strip that I had an idea for. And she saw my writing talent, and
Mhm.
she took me under her wings, and that was it. I was that was the first time I thought I could be a writer. This is possible, and then life gets in the way. But
After that, you end up getting married.
what's that?
After that, you ended up getting married after.
No, I didn't get married. I got married much later in life.
Oh, okay.
So
Damn.
yeah,
Okay.
so yeah, I went through high school, and then I thought I might enjoy going to film school. So I went to film school first,
Mhm.
and did that for a while, and had a really bad experience in film school. Uh, and
Wow.
that really kind of turned me off. There were two experiences. So where I had Mrs. Heltman in high school, who was my faculty advisor. I had another lady in college who was who was my other advisor, and
Mhm.
I was having a hard time in the film school setting because uh, I was also working, and I was a production assistant. And man, my idea was I wanted to be a family man. I wanted to make Disney movies. I wanted to make movies with kids and whatnot. And then when I started getting into the business, it was a lot, not tough, but the hours were incredible. I remember I was working on a show with Bob Costas. It was a fantasy sports show, and a really cool concept where Bob Costas would get to interview the legends of sports. And the I remember we were working on the Babe Ruth episode, and the director, we were running behind, and the director strikes at 3 o'clock in the morning and says, "Okay, we're going to take a break. Be back at 7 o'clock in the morning." And here I am in downtown Manhattan, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not going to get on the subway to go home, and I just realized, asked some of the people in the on the crew, is this typical? And he was like, yeah. And so I had second thoughts there about is this what I want to do? Is this how I want to live for my family? If I wanted to have kids and a wife, would I be working 18 hours a day and not see them? And so that was the first thing. And then I was taking a class called live television production, where you learn how to direct a live TV show, like a news program or a talk show. And man, the pressure is on. So this lady who was teaching the class, she's hammering into you, do this, and really just putting the pressure on, because time is money when you're working on TV and
and
and,
the
and
and
film.
people don't understand the whole entertainment product, like you're mentioning, is basically so competitive that if you don't actually have people watching your stuff and you slip in like ratings or whatever, that's performance right there. It's an entertainment product. You have to get stuff done on time. It's just what it is, and
Yep.
everyone is like kind of vying for your spot. I'm pretty sure you had the same thing like I did. You saw like on TV sometimes you saw like the red carpet premieres and the directors there taking the pictures, and you saw the cast and crew do those little smaller interview bits. Well, you know how like they're all like on the chairs next to each other, and they're like
That's
the
right.
chairs
That's
behind them.
right. Of
Yeah,
course. Yeah.
honestly, the way that like nowadays is different because Hollywood is way different now. When I was a kid, I was like, that looks so cool. Like the directors and in a cast all love each other. I thought personally, like for movies and all that stuff, you acted then they liked each other. Turns out that's not true. That's just me being a kid. It looks so cool. Like, you watch a
Yeah.
DVD, you watch like the behind the scenes feature that everyone's giving like interviews on their experience with the movie and stuff like that. They made it look like a great dream to have. But then when you actually went and tried to, achieve that dream, there's just like, okay, I'm not cut out for that. That's just not what I want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's kind of the realization that I came to in that setting, was that we are, this is there's a lot more to there's a lot of pressure in it. And it's not that I couldn't handle pressure, because I'm I'm a middle school principal, or I was a middle school principal. Now I'm an elementary principal. So it's not the pressure. It's more of the attitude. I guess I could, because she was really not nice when it came to making sure that you didn't mess up. You cut to the right angle, you did this and that. And she said some things to me that just were like, no, I don't want to work with people like this. And then so I was kind of despondent there for a while. And then some friends of mine knew that I wanted to work with kids, and they just, why don't you go to school to be a teacher? And I'm like, nah, that's real college. That's not film school. But I did. I got my bachelor's degree in elementary education, became a science teacher for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And then I had the opportunity to become a principal, and I went back to school, got my master's to be a principal. And here I am 32 years later.
So you ended up becoming a teacher after that. So what did you want to teach, actually?
Well, at the time I didn't know exactly what I wanted to teach. I thought maybe English, maybe, middle school. I knew I wanted to work with middle schoolers. So I applied for English and science positions, because in Florida, where I lived at the time, you could, if you had an elementary degree, it was considered a K through 8 degree. So you could teach anything from K through 8. And that's what so science came up, and I got the science position. So I was a science teacher for a while. Yep. And then, writing became a thing, on the back burner again. Can I really do this? My, low self-esteem types, that thing, is this something realistic? And writing didn't come about. And I dabbled a little bit on and off. I wrote a little bit here, made some game RPGs, and kind of following in my dad's footsteps there. And when I met my wife, or who was my fiance at the time, one of the things that I would do for her, when we were recording, is I would write every morning. I would write a little devotional sort of thing, a word, what we called the words of encouragement, or woes. And it was just like, just something to brighten her day, using biblical passages and kind of tying it in there. And so I did that for the most of the time when we were recording. And then on our wedding night, she gave me this book, bound with all the things I ever wrote her, into a book that was professionally bound. And she said, "You need to be a writer." And that was it. That was the final.
Okay.
That was the final thing. So I had the encouragement from my dad all the time,
Yeah.
Mrs. Houtman, and then all of a sudden, my wife was finally the one who gave me wings, and there at the end, and that's how I was able to start working on the Veil Saga and publish Piercing the Veil.
Okay. So now let's go from this angle. You're a person that has done writing, and some writers, some authors have this when they come on the show. Do you have any comic book background or anything?
I loved comic books growing up. I have a
Okay.
ton, but did I? I haven't written a comic book. Thought about writing it. Thought about, I have ideas.
You
I have a
collected more like
whole
Marvel or DC growing up?
both. I liked it.
Okay.
Batman and Captain America and Spider-Man were my favorites.
Okay.
And
So at any point did you get out of collecting comic books because it was just too expensive, or you just
exactly
didn't?
right, because you hit the nail on the head. It just got too expensive.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
both Marvel and DC got really smart there when they started tying in all the
Yes.
different, they had all these, Secret Wars and this wars and that and all that. And then, if you didn't buy a comic that you weren't normally collecting, you'd miss a chunk of the story. And then it just got crazy, especially with
At least as far as with DC, now if they have a big event, they're gonna specifically label it a tie-in issue. But the problem with them doing that, all this stuff now is like, I don't want to be that guy, but I have to be the guy. It's a little too late for that stuff. People are asking for this stuff for years, and they're just now doing some of this stuff. It's like, come on, man. Like, it's
Yeah.
one of the things where they're gonna get, oh, we finally did it. It's like, did you really finally do it, or you just were you like on your last leg and you had to do it? It's a little bit different. But
Well,
I
I
was going
don't.
to say to you, you like Captain America. Some of those older comic books you have might be a little bit beat up. Let's say Marvel does this thing. I'm pretty sure you heard of it, called an Epic Collection, where they basically reprint everything from where a character starts to however long. Honestly,
No, I didn't
so
know
you
that.
yeah, so you would essentially be collecting like Captain America 1 and following it all the way up to basically like when a new manga drops. Right now, currently, they dropped a new one, I think last week. They're on like Epic Collection volume 13 or 11, somewhere around there, honestly.
Yeah. Wow. I had no idea. Wow.
DC's doing the same thing too. But DC's, because they do this. Marvel's is at least in order with some of their characters. DC did it with the new thing called DC's Finest. So they did it with like their biggest thing is like jumping on points. So like a person could just jump into it. But my thing is that like a jumping on point for a lot of people is like they want to start at the beginning. I think they might be embarrassed about how comics used to look back in the day a little bit. But no, like I think people don't care. They want to start at the beginning.
Of course
For
you do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for Superman, they did that actually. For Superman, you can actually get Action Comics #1
Wow.
reprinted because Superman is called the first superhero, and it covers Action Comics 1 through 20. And you guys know I bought that. I instant bought that.
Oh no, I
Yeah.
didn't know that. That is
Yeah,
awesome.
it just dropped last week. If you go to your comic shop, they probably have it. I know
Yeah,
you guys have
where
comic
I
shops
live,
out
I
there.
wish they had. We don't have a comic shop, so I
No
mean,
way, really?
no. I live in a small town now in North Dakota. Compared to New York City, where there was a comic book store in every corner. Where now,
Good God, man.
yeah, I know it's tough. It's tough. I see comics every now and then. Like
Mhm.
last Christmas, they had that Batman comic series that was out.
Oh,
Where you find out that Santa Claus was one of his
it's about
his
Batman the Silent Night.
yes, yeah, and I wanted to get that, couldn't find it anywhere. My sister couldn't find it anywhere here, and they only sell it online digitally.
Actually, they're releasing the trade paperback version of that. Or I think in a few months, and they're going to do a sequel series to it this year coming up. So the
cool.
trade will be all four
That's
issues collected.
that's what I'm waiting for. I figured I'll just
Yeah,
wait for the trade paperback.
When I'll send you a link on Facebook to when it should drop, so you could order it off Amazon or whatever.
Yes. All right, thank you.
Or
Yeah.
and this is what I do. Since you said you don't have a comic shop around you, I can send you several websites. I use mycomicshop.com.
Oh, okay.
They keep they have all the newest stuff. And then if you ever even like some of the like new Epic collections that drop, some of the finest collections, all that stuff. So I'll just send you them over Facebook then.
Sweet.
If you ever want to get back into it, just get in slowly.
Yeah. I mean,
So
now that I have 3 boys, I could maybe justify it a little bit more.
yeah, well, I mean, they could like I don't know if they like Sonic because Sonic 3 is coming out very soon.
Yes. Oh, they
There are
can't wait for
Sonic
that.
comic books you can buy them actually.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
So
they like Spider-Man too, so they're
oh
they'd be
goodness
happy.
gracious! I wouldn't dare give them whatever happened to Spider-Man right now. You would be depressed about what happened to Spider.
I heard that it didn't go well.
There is another one. There is another one. There's some Ultimate Spider-Man, which is written by Jonathan Hickman. Spider-Man married with kids, because their biggest thing was always keeping Peter Parker as the guy that can't get it right.
I saw that.
That one just recently came out. That's like only like $10 anyway. So the other thing I'll ask you is, because you have a comic book background too. So as being an author, where does your inspiration? Your inspiration came from like your dad, but was there like a book or like a series you read from an author that was your other inspiration too? Like a lot of people is J.K. Rowling, some of it's J.R. Tolkien, some of it's the guy that wrote Chronicles of Narnia, C.J. Lewis.
Well, when I was I mean, I have a lot of authors that I like now, but when I was growing up, though, even though my dad had this big massive library of every modern book, fantasy and sci-fi book at the time, plus all the old ones that he had collected, I was intimidated by books. I mean, if I saw a book that was this thick, I mean, there's no way. I mean, I would be like, no, I don't think so. And again, going back to Miss Houtman, in freshman English in high school, she told us one of the assignments was that you have to write a book report, but you could be on any book you wanted as long as the book was over 200 pages. And I'm like, oh my gosh, 200 pages. There's no way. So I'm sitting there in the school library agonizing over this, thinking, what am I gonna do? I'm just not, I'm not into it.
Mhm.
And then I just turned around and I looked up, and they were on one of those spiral racks. I
Mhm.
saw the cover for Piers Anthony, A Spell for Chameleon, the first book in the Xanth series. And it was interesting. It had this really cool picture with a manticore and this kid staring up at the manticore. And I'm like, fine, I'm just going to bite the bullet and I'm going to do it. And that was it. That I fell in love with reading, and I became a voracious reader in high school. And so loved all the Piers Anthony books. F. Paul Wilson was a big inspiration growing up. Most recently, though, the big inspiration for me is Brandon Sanderson. He has taken like writing and world building to a whole new level, and that's what really challenged me when I was writing my books, especially after I read his Stormlight Archives. I mean, when you talk about world building and just the complexity of creating something that is fantasy, but it seems so realistic, and with character development and again world building, just blew me away, and that kind of really set the bar for me uh, right now, and that's kind of what I attain to when I write to kind of try to reach that level, and knowing that I was in another podcast last year and I was being interviewed, and she didn't know that Sanderson was one of my inspirations, and she had read my book, and she was saying, "Yeah, when I was reading your book, I was like 3 chapters in, and I forgot that I wasn't reading a Brandon Sanderson book." And I was like, "What? Yes, that was so cool to hear that she was not only a Brandon Sanderson fan, but she compared my writing to Brandon Sanderson's, and so that
Because
was
well,
that
actually,
was
then
that was a big,
because Brandon Sanderson, big author, a lot of people's
yeah.
favorite. What's your favorite books that he's done? You like the Wheel of
Stormlight
Time,
Art.
don't you?
Wheel of Time. I mean, that's where he kind of really broke in. But I mean, when he wrote the Stormlight Archives,
Mhm.
that's my favorite. Like I said, it is without meaning to say a pun, it is the perfect pun, a perfect storm of storytelling, world
Mhm.
building, and character development. I mean, you could do a class on how well he developed that book and that story. Just to that for me is really good. I liked his Mistborn series. I liked uh, I liked a lot of the standalone books.
Mhm.
But what's cool about a lot of the books that he's written, it's all tied together into this universe that he calls the Cosmere. So, like,
Mhm.
you might read a standalone book like Warbreaker and think, "Oh, this is a cool book," but then you find out that there are characters that are from that book that are now in other books as well, and you're like, "Oh, cool," And then he has one main character that hops around to the different planets in that what he calls the Cosmere and appears in most of his books. That's really cool. So he was brilliant when he came up with that concept because you really fans really love that kind of thing. But even if you're not a fan, if you're just picking up Mistborn and you read the
Mhm.
first three books of Mistborn, you're not missing it. You're not really missing out on anything because it's a complete story in itself. So.
So so after that, let's go into your author history. So, what was the first book you ever published in, and what was the
So
journey to get it published?
okay, so I only have one book out. It's right now. It's Piercing the Veil. It's the first book in the Veil saga, and then the next book hopefully will be out next year. I'm working on that one right now,
Okay.
and then I have tons of other story ideas here and there.
Mhm.
But Piercing the Veil was the first one that I published,
Mhm.
and that was a journey. Because I did a lot of world building. I was challenged by not only Brandon Sanderson, but I had a friend of mine who was in a writing group, excellent writer. I wish the guy would publish his book already. Um, his name is Carlos Bo, and he's on Facebook and all the writing groups. Excellent writer, great guy. He asked me if I would just critique one of his papers, one of his chapters, and so I'm reading it, and it just visually his prose was just I could see the city that he was describing as the character was walking through it. And one of my comments was that, man, the world building in this and the way you describe the city is just incredible. And he commented back, he said, and he's from the Bronx, New York. He lives in the Bronx. And he was saying that, yeah, it's that vivid because I did a lot of world building, but not only that, I created the entire city out of pizza boxes in my living room. So he just, he was another one that kind of challenged me with the world building. So I did a lot of that world building. I developed all the races and their history, and I developed the secret history of what's going on behind the scenes. So that took a long time. Plus, trying to find the time to write. As a husband, as a dad, as a principal, they're just, time is limited. So I kind of, it took me a while to get into a groove. So I would say over a 15-year period, I dabbled in the background history. But then when I really figured out when it was time to, or when I found time to write, when I really got into the groove, it took me about 3 years to actually write the first novel from in all its incarnations, because you start out with the first draft and then you get feedback and input from your editor and your ARC reader, your alpha readers, your beta readers. So by the time I got to the fifth draft, after I had all the input, it was about 3 years.
So you actually hired an editor, as you mentioned,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
how was the feedback like initially when you gave it to him or her?
Him. So
Okay.
so
Don't assume these days, right?
no. So you asked me earlier who one of my inspirations were as far as writers were, and I mentioned F. Paul Wilson. And so I went out on a limb when I was looking for an editor, and because I know he dabbled in editing, so I just reached out and I contacted him on Facebook, and I said, is it possible to hire you to be to be my editor? And he answered me back, which I was surprised that even happened. That, how many times does a famous person actually respond to a message on Facebook? And he did. He responded and said, well, I don't really do that now, but I can find somebody for you. So I'm thinking, okay, cool. Well. So he found me one of his old editors, a guy named Patrick Labruto. Now, the name, you don't know the name because he's not as his name isn't popular, but man, his pedigree is incredible. This guy, I was shocked when he gave me the name, and I'm looking, whoa, this guy is like, he was an editor for Tor. He won the award for sci-fi and fantasy editor of the year one time. He worked on Dune. He worked on others. And Patrick was just such a great guy to get to know, because he did agree to be my editor for book one. And it was such a great process. I mean, he was awesome. It was more, for me, it was a master class on not only writing, but editing and publishing a book. So it was definitely worth it. And it was a great experience. One of the funny things that he told me when I was interviewing him, he said, yeah, I've read this book and I've read that book. And, I've worked with Stephen, and he refers to Stephen King as Stephen. And it's like, he knows the guy. And the funniest thing he said was, yeah, when I was working at Tor, one of the books that came across my desk was this book called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And now to this very day, I kick myself for not picking up the book. I was one of the over 100 people who rejected that book. So
and it turns out it didn't matter because she ended up becoming basically richer than we'll ever be in our entire lives.
Exactly. I know that's what he said. I kick myself, but that one editor, and even J.K. Rowling, she talks about how how many rejection letters she had and how she never.
Yeah, like, you know what's crazy, man, is that there's a lot of the newer. I always think that there's a new crop of people coming up generally within about a week or so. So like, there's always these new crop of YouTubers. There's always these new crops of authors. These new crop of authors that have been coming up since like 20. About a 2-year time span, like 2022, 2024.
Yep.
They have this thing where it's like I keep getting rejected and I keep getting rejected. And it's like, okay, to some degree, I can understand because I'm pretty sure you've heard of this. There have been certain people in charge of certain editing positions where if you don't have your characters with check boxes, then you get rejected. But as you know, and a lot of other people do this, you don't have to go through that system anymore.
No,
you don't. You can make a book with the characters and world and title and everything you want. It's just not going to be something that's put through the mainstream. And I think it's because people want that stupid New York Times bestseller on their book, which as people know, over the years, we talked about it on many of these shows, not just this show, the other ones with a lot of authors I did, that kind of means nothing really. That's just like, it's a little cool thing, but it's like, hey, this is like you and 500,000 people have this little title too. It's like, is that really special at that point? You can literally independently publish your own book now yourself.
Yes. Oh yeah, and that's why one of the exactly the reason why you describe it is because you got to check off all these boxes, and I was kept on going back and forth. Am I going to traditionally publish? I wasn't afraid of getting rejections. I thought I knew the story was good enough that somebody would like it, whether it was Tor or a smaller publishing company. I wasn't afraid of the rejections, but I had what clinched it for me was an author and editor named gosh, why can't I think of his name? I have his book right. David Farland. Sorry. Yeah, David Farland, and he was actually Brandon Sanderson's teacher in at BYU, and that's he taught Brandon Sanderson how to write, and he's also famous for the New York Times best-selling series Rune Lords, and through Tor. And he had said in an interview once, he said, if I could go back though, I would self-publish the Rune Lords, because when I proposed to the Tor, I knew there were 3 books in the series. That was it. I knew the series, how it was going to start, how it was going to end, and it was going to be 3 books, and that was it. And Tor made him write 6 more books. So the first 3 were ones that he really wanted to do, but his heart wasn't in the last 6, he said, and it shows because they didn't do as well. And he said, I would go back. I would, without doubt, I would self-publish. And that's what really clinched it for me, because I didn't want anybody telling me those check boxes you were talking about. I didn't want to have this in there. I didn't want to have that in there. I didn't want, if the story was done, I wanted the story done. And so my wife and I, we started our own publishing company. And
you did? Okay. Yeah.
I
know, because I know like all authors now, a lot of people are more in the know now compared to back then, because technology's advanced at the point. The internet's a lot more evolved compared to what it used to. I mean, I was not this show, my previous one, where we had an episode where we literally went over the criteria, and to say they haven't gone fully insane is an understatement. You literally, in your, like with the Academy Awards now for movies, we even read the criteria on a show a long time ago. You have to have that stuff in there. You do, or you basically don't get it. It's their way of just gatekeeping. It's their way of basically controlling you. You want this position of power, but you gotta compromise your integrity and your characters. Like most people would do it. And to be fair, I wouldn't blame them, because they think they're desperate. That's their only shot. But you don't have to do that, And I think people will realize the reason why they won't do it is because they feel like if they don't go through that system, they won't be as popular or famous, or you won't sell enough books. But, even if you have that, there's no guarantee that you're going to be bigger after that, or more books get sold. And keep in mind, when you factor in like royalties, right? Bookstore has your books. Because people don't understand this. You could order, let's say I'm an owner of a store, and I ordered like 100 copies of your book, and I put 5 of them on a shelf. Well, that does not mean that all those 100 books are going to sell, Right. But the average person thinks, oh, if I bought this book from this guy, then you get the cut of the money. It's like, no, when you're factoring in selling your book to a store, you're also keep in mind that they have to sell those copies too. It's shelf space and all that stuff. And it's easier. Like you said, just do your own thing, you
Yeah,
know, and just
it
obviously
is.
market, which is the hardest part,
That is the hardest part, the
Yeah.
marketing, trying to, uh, yeah, and nowadays, and marketers have gotten smart because they know that, so they're targeting indie authors like myself, and I get at least 2 a day from some people, and they all have the same script. It's like, "Oh, hi, I saw that you're an author, and, I'd love to know more about what you write," and so you engage in a conversation with them, and then they ask for your link, and then they suddenly spring on you, "Oh,
Mhm.
what do you do for marketing?" And it's like they all have gone to the same school. It's so weird. But how do you know whether they're legit anyway? So, um,
Mhm.
but marketing is the toughest part.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people, their default thing is like, well, you just got to market better. But like everyone typically, I can't tell people how much I share videos every day in like Facebook groups, on Twitter. I'll try to mix it up every once in a while. It's not really just marketing. You kind of just have to hit like lightning in a bottle at a single point. You know, it's
Right.
really just all it is. Like sometimes you post stuff that's insightful, it gets less traction than if I were to say like, hi, have a good day, everybody. If I say hi, have a good day, everyone, in the morning when I wake up, that post will have more traction than a post where I say like, man, the world sucks. You see, like not everything will have the same level of traction. It's just how it is. And plus, since there's more authors coming up trying to do the independent route because they're realizing the publishing, the traditional way of it is not viable if you're not going to bend to their rules. Everyone else is going to do that. It's not just like
Yep.
people think it's such a binary way. Oh, if I thought it, that means no one else did. No, no, no. It's not how that works at all. Everyone
Yeah.
else thought the same thing you did. They're just executing on it differently or just haven't been able to execute on it based off of stipulations and reasons,
Yeah.
obviously. So we're looking at it, and that means that we're getting into the more of a competition route now. So you're competing with everyone else in their own independent publishing window doing it like you. And that's a lot of
Yep.
people.
It
Everyone's
is.
doing their own thing. It's good, but competition, I mean, you have to be putting out a better book than that person. No matter what
Yeah.
genre it is, you have to be better than maybe 1,000, 2,000 other people out there that are doing the exact same thing. So I don't think it's just marketing. And people say it's just competition. It's just a lot of it out there. It's a lot of options out there,
There are. Oh, there are. Yep. Yep. That's for sure.
Ugh.
Yeah,
So
like I'm going to an author fair this weekend, and there's going to be
mhm.
21 other independent authors there who
Oh
are going to be
Lord.
sharing their books.
So let's go down this road because I always ask these questions to authors to kind of pick their brains about how they come up with their craft. We'll start with this one. Okay, so how do you come up with the story for your book?
How could I not? My brain is always on. I can't. I mean, yeah. There's. I couldn't even tell you how I come up with them because they're just there, and there's more stories up there than I could possibly write in my lifetime. So I have a file on my computer that is super thick with story ideas, and so they're. I I guess I'm just a naturally born creative. I mean, I'm always thinking. At night, if I got to find some way to shut my brain off, otherwise I can't sleep. Uh, because I'm always thinking about different stories or what if this or what if that. So yeah, I don't have any problem. I don't have writer's block. I don't have I don't have any of that, any of those issues.
How do you go about creating characters for your story? So let's start with a main hero. What was the concept for your main hero?
So Jeremy Goodson is the main. Well, there's Jeremy Goodson and Masaru Hagen are the two main characters
Mhm.
in the Veil saga, in book one, Piercing the Veil. And Jeremy, I wanted to be very different from your classic hero. Jeremy is average, and he just kind of gets roped into this
Mhm.
world of magic and mystery that's going on, and he's just got to either saddle up or he's going to get eaten up. Is kind of the idea there. So he's definitely I wouldn't say your anti-hero, but he's definitely your atypical hero. He's not buff. He's a fourth grade teacher, overweight, wears glasses, um, and doesn't have any fighting ability or anything like that, and just has to grow, and that's really what I wanted to see. I wanted a character that would grow with the story, because for me, that's one of the things that intrigues me when I read a good story, is that I want to see growth in a character, and that's what I did with Jeremy Goodson. And anytime I create a character, I want them to be as realistic as possible. So I'll create a background, a backstory. I'll try to find their voice. What do they sound like? How do they talk? How do they inflect their words? That kind of stuff. And I just try to create a realistic, somebody who's realistic.
Okay. So the next thing is we'll do villains then. So the villain of your story, what was the concept of creating that character? Because every good story has to have a villain. You gotta have those.
Yeah. So there are two villains in Piercing the Veil. There's your typical. There's the goblin, the goblin emperor in there, and he's just your typical goblin, just evil and whatnot. And what makes him interesting is that he has a vendetta against one of the elves in the story. But the other villain is a human, and his name is Thaddeus Wilt. And I'll tell you, this is one of the funny things that my editor had told me after I submitted the third draft to him. He said, "I got good news for you, and I got bad news for you." I said, "Oh, okay." He said, your villain, your antagonist, Thaddeus Wilt, is by far one of the greatest villains I've ever read, and he's the best character in the book. He is the best character in the book." And then he said, "The bad news is Thaddeus Wilt is the best character in the book, because your hero is supposed to be the best character in the book."
Yeah.
So he said, "We got to work on your hero a little bit more, and kind of we got to craft him, make him a little more vulnerable, make him a little bit more interesting." And we worked on that. But yeah, people love Thaddeus Wilt. They are intrigued by him. And for me, he's so fun to write. He's not your typical villain in the sense where he is, he thinks, well, I guess nowadays it's becoming more typical, but he really thinks he's the hero. He thinks he is he thinks what he's doing is the right thing. And he's going to do it. He's going to go about it no matter what. So his idea is that he knows that the veil exists. And in the story, the veil is what separates the magical beings and magic from humanity. And the veil came about because at one time, elves and dwarves and gnomes and humans and goblins coexisted. And then the humans just started getting too big for their britches, and they weren't listening. They didn't want to be, they wanted to become dominant, but they were also had a shorter lifespan than the enchanted races. And so they decided, well, they're just going to kill themselves off anyway at the rate they're going, and we're just going to hide ourselves behind this veil and make sure they don't get access to magic, so they can't cause any issues. And that went on for several thousand years. And so Thaddeus Wilt knows about the veil, and he knows that magic exists. And his idea is that I can't allow evil people, evil men, to get access to magic, because they'll just use it to hoard power. But he'll go about it, by any means. He's almost like the Punisher in Marvel, where he's not afraid to kill. He doesn't really, he thinks he's on this crusade, and if you get in his way, you're in trouble.
So what about supporting characters? Because you have the two main ones, but a lot of people like the good supporting characters, like comedic relief. There's like always the characters that's like the rival to the main one, where it has a nice dynamic balance. How do you go about creating supporting characters?
Well, it depends. Supporting characters, I feel, they need to fit. They need to have a purpose. They're there. They're not everybody. Not every sidekick, or not every hero has a sidekick.
Yes.
But they may have other. They may have other needs. So of course there is the wise older elf that kind of guides Jeremy along the way. that fills the Obi-Wan Kenobi role, sort of in that sense. So he's a supporting character. There's also a one of the helpers that he has, not really a sidekick, but more of a he's like more like Alfred to more like a butler, but not quite his butler. But and he's a reptilian called a Koth, and he is there to help Jeremy, acclimate to the world of magic, or things, what's going on behind the veil. That's his purpose there. So, and again, supporting characters, I think, even incidental characters, there needs to be an element of realism to them. There's no cardboard cutouts. Everybody has a story, and most people think they're the hero of their own story. So, they're keeping that in mind. So everybody serves a purpose, and they have that element of realism there. So I try to give everybody some fair play.
So after that, the other components of writing a good story. So that would be, let's try pacing. So how do you go about your pacing? Because, I'm pretty sure you've hated reading books that put you to sleep. Straight up, just NyQuil the book.
Yep. Yeah. And that comes out. So when I do a first draft, I just kind of, I hate to use the term.
Everything on there.
Well, that exactly. I hate to use that term, but that's pretty much what it is. Yeah. You're just getting the story out of your head and into written form.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you go back and edit, that's when you start to really see the pacing, and this slows down the pacing. This, the flow is not quite right here. And then I have a critique partner that I work with, Daryl Percival, another awesome writer. Oh, you actually interviewed him a few weeks ago, Daryl. Yeah. And he's an awesome guy too. And so we kind of help each other there. We keep an eye on the pacing when we're critiquing each other's work. And so that kind of helps. I feel because I'm a lover of stories, I even when I wasn't reading back, in middle school and elementary school, I was still watching. I was still role playing in my room with my action figures and everything, and having other, even when I pretended with my friends and we played superheroes, everybody kind of had the, I want to be Batman, I want to be Superman. Well, for whatever reason, I was always compelled to make something up, so I was a different superhero that I made up. That, of course, it was a carbon copy of Batman anyway, because he was my favorite. But still, he wasn't Batman, because Batman was, Batman's in Gotham City, type thing.
Yeah.
So I've always been, like I said, creative there, and I've always been a lover of stories. So I think and that comes out naturally in my writing, because I know what a good story looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, I don't have to overanalyze it too much when I'm self-editing, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, when you're critiquing, when you're helping other people write, you're honing your skills there too, because you're reading from a writer's perspective. And that's I recommend every writer, I think, needs a critique partner, or at least a critique.
Oh yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So then the next thing I'll ask you is dialogue, because dialogue is very important in written novels. So how do you go about crafting that for the characters?
Well, each character has to have their own voice, and again, that almost seems that almost comes naturally to me. I feel like, except with a few, like when I'm writing the dwarves in my stories, they have a very specific dialect. So I kind of write what I think that they would say, and then I have to go back and I have to change their dialogue. Like, they don't say you, they say yar, and they don't, so I have to kind of change that around, and also thinking about their culture, because they've lived so long, and their culture is developed within their mountain kingdom, and without very much influence from humans. So I had to think, okay, how does this society develop over centuries, over millennia, and what does their dialect sound like? What is their slang like? So that I have to be a little bit more intentful when I'm writing those. But like Jeremy, in my head, I already know what Jeremy sounds like. Masaru, I already know what Masaru sounds like. Mercurio the elf, I know what he sounds like. I have that. It just comes naturally because I know. Again, I know what a good story is, and I know part of a good story is having great characters that can move the story along. So having that voice for each character and being able to tell the difference without having the dialogue tag in there.
So now that you got the first book done, is there anything you're going to be doing on your second book that you learned as a lesson not to do from your first book?
Oh gosh. Oh, well, I feel like I took so long to write the first book that I learned those lessons writing the first book.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the publishing aspect, I learned a lot more. That I know when I go to publish the second book, there are specific things that I know that I want to do that are not that I did with book one that were not quite, that I could have done better as far as the marketing. We did a Kickstarter for the first book, and that was really really well received. But I think there are things about the Kickstarter that I could do even better, having different tiers and having different options in that Kickstarter. Having making sure that when I'm working with my cover designer, that was a learning experience too. So I think it'll be easier this time because I don't have to learn all the formatting or how the format works or how that I never even thought about a cover. I always knew that I wanted to have a cover that was that looked cool, like they call a wraparound cover, but I never thought about the spine, having the spine on there, that in order for the cover artist to create the cover, they have to know how many pages it is, because that's determines how thick the spine is, and those things that I just you take for granted that you don't really think about. So that I think will run much smoother, that whole process, knowing all that.
Because your cover art, I saw it before we did it. It's just a sword and it has like a 9 right there. That was kind of cool. Gives off, yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
So
it's
one of the
different from the
symbols.
traditional way of doing a cover. Most covers are way more like darker and like yellow on the title. That looks like some medieval fantasy type of thing you grab in a cave and the whole cave just comes down.
Well, again, that's the other thing too. With this first book, is I agonized over the cover. I wanted a more traditional cover that that had character depiction, or a depiction of a scene or something like that had characters on it. Like what I grew up with when I described that first book, that first fantasy book I read, A Spell for Chameleon. It had the characters on the front, and that's what really drew me into it. And I was just playing around with teaser covers, and my wife was like, "Oh, I really like the way that looks." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's just a teaser." "No, you should use that for the book." I'm like, No, I'm gonna have the illustrator draw a really cool scene. And she was like, "No, you really should just go with minimal is in now." And so when I started to do the research, she was right. I even did polls that were out, Facebook polls that I was asking people, and they like the minimal cover. And part of, like you were saying, it's not dark or anything like that.
Most covers you've seen are like dark as hell. They're very few. They don't pop as much. I think that's the reason why some people may not buy a book. And there has to be some level of like, how to say, like the cover art it's like a first intro to basically first impressions matter, right? So if your cover art isn't good, or it's not going to be perceived good by the average person, then they're going to skip on your book entirely because they don't know what you've written in there, because, well, they haven't purchased it,
Right, exactly, yeah. So yeah, I did want something that was alluring, something that, but I also wanted the light in there as well, because part of the theme of the book is hope. that they,
Yeah.
so I wanted people to see, to sort of feel that in the cover, and that's with the light streaming through and all that. And I when I was, just coming up with the designs and working with my cover artist, Autumn Burt, she gave me different variations, and I love the gold and the purple that she used to kind of bring this out. And I've had great responses. People will look at the book and they're like, "Oh, this looks like a professionally published, book that you would find, in that a professional publishing company would do." And that was my goal, knowing that I had that as an independent publisher, I would be competing with the traditional publishers, and that's why I wanted to make sure that I had the best art, the best formatting, the best everything, all the way up to my audiobook narrator, who, a multiple award winning voice actor, Sean Pratt, did the audiobook narration.
Oh, you have an audiobook, so you sell the book through Amazon too, I'd imagine.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's on Audible or anywhere audiobooks are
How's
sold.
that actually? Do you like the process? And everyone's opinion on this is very, very, very different. How's your experience selling your book on Amazon? Do you feel like it's good traffic overall?
Yeah. Sadly, I do sell the most on Amazon, and
Damn Jeff Bezos.
yeah, not that I really want to, but
The
and
cut is not worth it, I imagine. So I think
no,
it's like what, 70, 30?
especially if you're not willing to go exclusive, and that was something I was not willing to do. I wanted to be able to sell my book everywhere,
Oh,
because
okay. So they have this like partner program, I imagine, where if you're just with them, you probably get boosted up in like the algorithm or whatever. But if you want to do your own thing, okay, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, that's the same thing with Audible, with the audiobook. If you don't go Audible exclusive, and of course Audible is the biggest audiobook company around, but there's others out there where people, Spotify has audiobooks and other companies have audiobooks.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to distribute wide, because again, I'm competing with these traditional publishing companies, and I wanted to be able to have the same thing. And it was also important for me to be able to release all three versions at the same time, the paperback, the audiobook, and the ebook, and do a wide release at the same time. So it did take a little bit longer because I had to wait for the audiobook to be done, and everything launched on the same day. And
how was it when you finally got the actual physical book in your hands done and you're like, oh wow, it's really done?
Yeah, that it's a feeling. It's one of those feelings that you really can't describe. You're overwhelmed, and it's like, I cannot believe I did this. And I would probably, as you probably tell by the way I look, I'm not an athlete. So, but I imagine that it feels like what a marathon runner would if you ran the New York City Marathon and you finished, I would think that's probably the equivalent there, that you've accomplished this major accomplishment. So,
all right. So you also did a book signing in October, I remember.
Yeah, I do several book signings, as much
Have
as
you
I
ever done
get
one of
off.
like Barnes and Nobles ever?
So I haven't done Barnes and Nobles yet, and they are, because again, I live in the middle of nowhere. So the closest one is in Bismarck, and I will probably eventually do that one at the Bismarck Barnes and Noble, which is 4 hours away. But so I try to go to the conventions. Right now I'm in this process of trying to figure out what works best. Like, I went to a street festival and didn't do very well. I mean, I thought, this big street festival, I'd have more people come, but I didn't do well at all. But when I go to the cons, like we had our local con called Bakken Con a few months ago, and I did really well. And then I went to Valley Con, which was in Fargo. I went to a few weeks ago. And then, like I said, this weekend I'm going to Jamestown for their author festival that they're having there. So, just kind of in the process of figuring out what works best, as far as is it really worth the time and the money to go to these places. So, but yeah, I think eventually I probably will do the one in Bismarck. They said I could, and last summer, was it? No, it's 2 summers ago when the book first came out, was when I did um, a countryside uh, east coast book tour where I went to little independent bookstores um, from North Dakota all the way to New Jersey. And just that was a lot of fun because I got to stop at all these independent bookstores, and I love supporting independent bookstores. So I'm always telling, if you're gonna order my book, I always say just get the ISBN number and go and order it from an independent bookstore. That's the best way to do it. I mean, sure, you can order it off of Amazon and and they'll get it for you, but so can an independent bookstore, and
Yeah.
they
And
need
I
your
would
help
say
more than
sales is sale. I always say,
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
another
well, and they
book,
need
another
your help more
merchandise.
than Jeff Bezos does. That's for sure.
That's the funny thing. You think he's running his company right now. There's
Yeah,
someone else probably doing it.
you're right. You're right. Yeah.
I realized at a certain point, the same with the Dragon Ball. People thought Akira Toriyama was always still running Dragon Ball. I had to factor in someone else was running that shit. He was just so filthy beyond rich. He was probably on some yacht with some hot Japanese chick getting severely blown by her. Why? He's filthy rich. What does he need to do? At that point in life, I don't really know what you do to keep yourself interested because you already reached the highest pinnacle of what people want. Really,
Yeah.
just there's no like trying anymore. You're like, oh, I kind of did it. But more now it comes with like stress and everything. More stress, more money, more problems. I think that's the saying. So yeah, man, it was great to get this done for the first time. This last few things I'll ask you. First thing is, do you have anything planned coming up in 2024, going into 2025? You want to let the audience know about?
Well, I do have a few things going on. I'm finishing up book 2, so I'm hoping to do the Kickstarter for book 2 in 2025. I'm hoping that'll come out. So if you follow me, you'll see when that comes out. I also have an anthology series that I'm working on with other authors called the Shared World Project. And if you're interested, you can find out information about that on my page as well. So I'm hoping that'll come together soon. And then one of my passions is helping fledgling writers get off their feet. So I have coming up in the new year, I'm going to be teaching a writing course for young writers ages 12 to 18, an 8-part writing course where we kind of go into the basics and do a lot of critiquing and encouragement and show them that they really can write. Writing, I think a lot of people think writing is harder than it really is, because if you're a lover of stories, you know what a story looks like, you know what it sounds, so I really do believe that if you got a story on your heart, then you can write it.
Yeah, like that's the thing is a lot of people don't understand. I try to do film stuff like you. So I remember I took a film class in high school, and I remember that's the only class I really cared about in high school, for being honest here, outside of a few other ones here and there. With that one, it did give me a little bit of insight of like, it isn't easy writing a screenplay. I told people this. I don't people think it's easy. Before you even write the story out, it's a thing called like you said before, there's a layout you have to do.
Yes.
So you have to submit a layout first of like, okay, so just an example for anyone who doesn't know this. So like, let's say you want to make a movie or a TV show episode, and the first episode of the movie, you have a scene. So the scene of like walking down the stairs. Okay. So before you do anything else, I know you want to get to the big action stuff. No, you have to literally draw, you potentially write out or draw out or make it visual on this layout that you get the person walking down the stairs first. Scenes are not just like someone doing something. It's an actual thing that has to have multiple steps done to make a good scene.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people this isn't even stuff that's that's even like confidential. Just look it up. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have right on my bookshelf here the Screenwriter's Bible. It's got everything in it, on how to write a screenplay. And screenplay writing, I think, is a lot harder because you don't get to really add all those details that you want to add, where you're describing certain things. You're just basically you're writing the dialogue and you're writing what's happening in the scene, but not like you would in a regular book, where you're describing everything. Unless it's an important detail. So it's definitely a different style of writing.
All right. So the last thing I'll ask you is, do you have any shout outs you want to give to anyone in particular, and anything else you want to say before we end the show?
Yeah, there's lots of people I'd like to shout out to. So, my wife, like I said, I would not, Piercing the Veil saga would not exist without my wife, because she was the one who really encouraged me and said that, you can do this. And then Miss Houtman, she believed in me when a lot of people didn't, in high school. And she also taught me that I could write. And then my writing partner, Daryl, man, he's another one that certainly could not, where I could not have finished Piercing the Veil without. Very, very fortuitous to have met Daryl. That was awesome. And then today is my best friend's birthday, Alex. So I'd like to do a shout out to Alex. Happy birthday,
Awesome.
buddy.
All right. So thank you guys for checking out this episode of the MSK show, and we will see you guys later.